Okay, so get ready because today's deep dive, it's a little different. We're heading down the rabbit hole, like, with a twist.
Oh.
Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but through the lens of logic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you requested this one, and I'll be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect at first. Wonderland is basically all about being nonsensical.
Right. It really is.
But then we got into those excerpts that you sent.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how Alice's journey through Wonderland, it isn't just about these whimsical encounters, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Each absurd situation that she faces actually chips away at a very specific type of Victorian logic.
Okay.
Which I find fascinating.
Okay, so there's a method to the madness.
Precisely. Think about it. Alice comes from her prim and proper world right, tumbles into Wonderland, and what does she try to do? Immediately, she tries to make sense of it all, using the tools she knows, geography, language, even simple cause and effect.
Right, like when she's falling down the rabbit hole. I remember that part, like, giving me chills as a kid, but she's trying to remember her geography lessons.
Exactly. Surrounded by, floating maps and jars of marmalade, and she's trying to calculate how far she's fallen, how long she has left. It's hilarious and so telling at the same time.
Because it shows how ingrained all those Victorian morals and logic and reason were.
Exactly. And Carol cleverly uses this juxtaposition to highlight their limitations, because in Wonderland, those rules simply don't apply. Time is fluid, language is a game, and even like the basic laws of physics are out the window.
So it's like he's holding up this funhouse mirror to Victorian society, showing how their rigid thinking can be just as absurd as, like, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party.
A brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
Think about Alice's encounter with the Cheshire Cat, for example. It disappears and reappears at will. Its grin defies any logical explanation. And yet, what frustrates Alice the most?
Let me guess. Trying to have a normal conversation with it.
Precisely. She asks for directions.
Right.
And the Cheshire Cat, true to form, throws out these riddles about it, depending where she wants to go.
Right.
And Alice is trying to apply logic, like if I want to get somewhere, I need directions. But the Cheshire Cat operates on a completely different plane.
It's like that quote, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But in Wonderland, even knowing where you're going doesn't mean you'll get there the way you expect.
Exactly. And this is where Carol's genius shines through, because he's not just presenting nonsense for the sake of it. He is dismantling the very foundations of Victorian logic, piece by piece language, which Victorians prize for its precision right. Becomes a tool for wordplay and misdirection.
So even in those early chapters, before we even get to the Mad Hatter or the Queen of Hearts, he is setting the stage for a much deeper critique.
Absolutely. Each encounter, no matter how fantastical it seems, it serves a purpose. And as we delve deeper into Alice's journey, you'll see how Carol masterfully uses this absurdity to challenge not just logic, but also the social order that it upholds.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. Where do we go from here? What other aspects of Victorian logic get turned on their head? Okay, so Carol's using this nonsense to dismantle Victorian logic, but how does that actually play out in terms of, like, social commentary?
That's where it gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's take the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, for instance.
Okay.
Here you have this, iconic symbol of Victorian society, tea time.
Right.
But Carol turns it into this free-for-all of broken rules and nonsensical riddles.
It's like that scene just embodies the phrase, mad as a hatter. But thinking about it through this lens of logic, there's so much more going on.
Exactly. And remember how obsessed Victorians were with etiquette? Especially at social gatherings, like tea parties. Every little detail had its place.
Oh, absolutely. I remember reading about all those rules, like how to hold your cup, what to say, even how to stir your tea. Like, it makes me anxious just thinking about it.
Right. But in Wonderland, all those rules are thrown out the window. The Mad Hatter and the March Hare are constantly switching seats. Their table manners are atrocious. Time itself has lost all meaning.
It's chaos, but it's almost liberating chaos in a way, you know? Like Carol is saying, what if we just threw out the rule book and embraced the absurdity?
Precisely. And by doing so, he exposes the arbitrary nature of those rules in the first place. Like, why are we so fixated on these societal constructs?
Yeah.
Do they truly serve a purpose? Or are they just these nonsensical traditions that we blindly follow?
It's like he's giving us permission to question everything.
Exactly. And this theme of questioning authority extends beyond just social etiquette. Remember those nonsensical lessons that Alice encounters?
Yes.
Reeling, writhing, and all that?
I've always wondered about those. They're so funny, but I never quite understood what he was getting at.
Well, think about the Victorian education system. It was very rigid, focused on rote memorization and unquestioning obedience to authority.
Oh, right. Like those kids were practically robots memorizing facts, but not actually understanding them.
Precisely. And that's what Carol is satirizing with these absurd lessons. They're a commentary on the absurdity of teaching without meaning prioritizing memorization over true understanding.
It's like he's making fun of the idea that knowledge equals power, when in reality it's the ability to think critically and question that truly matters.
Exactly. And speaking of questioning, we can't forget the caucus race. Talk about a nonsensical system.
Oh my gosh.
Everyone runs around in a circle, they get soaking wet, and then they all win prizes.
Don't even get me started on that one. It's like the ultimate satire of pointless competition.
Exactly. It's Carroll's way of poking fun at the Victorian obsession with achievement and reward, even when the goals are completely arbitrary and the playing field is totally uneven. He's highlighting the absurdity of blindly following rules, even when they make absolutely no sense.
You're making me see Alice's adventures in Wonderland in a whole new light. But we haven't even talked about the Queen of Hearts or the trial yet. How does Carroll use those scenes to critique Victorian logic and society?
The Queen of Hearts and that trial. If there's one place where Carroll really lets loose with his satire, it's there. But before we get to that, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the Mad Hatter's Tea Party being liberating chaos.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about how freeing it felt compared to all those stuffy Victorian tea parties we were talking about.
But isn't there also something a bit unsettling about that world? I mean, Alice definitely finds it fun at times, but she's also constantly confused and frightened by the lack of rules.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess it's exciting at first, but after a while, that constant chaos would be exhausting.
Exactly. It's like living in a world without gravity. Sure, you could fly around and do all sorts of cool things, but you'd also lose the stability and predictability that make life feel, well, livable.
And that's something Carroll seems to be highlighting throughout Alice's journey. It's like he's saying, yes, logic and reason can be limiting, but they also provide a necessary framework for understanding the world.
Precisely. Without that framework, things descend into utter chaos. Which brings us back to the Queen of Hearts and that trial.
Right.
Talk about a system gone completely off the rails.
It's like a nightmare version of a courtroom. The charges are nonsensical, the witnesses are unreliable, and the jury is literally a deck of cards.
And at the center of it all is the Queen, driven by her whims and her infamous decree, off with their heads.
It's absurd, but also a little chilling when you think about how easily power can be abused when logic and reason are abandoned.
That's exactly the point Carroll is making. The Queen's court is a caricature of absolute power, unchecked by logic, justice, or even common sense. It's a world where sentences are handed down based on whims and feelings, rather than evidence or reason.
Which, in a way, is the opposite of that liberating chaos we saw at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Here, the lack of logic leads not to freedom, but to tyranny.
You got it. And that's the brilliance of Carroll's approach. He uses absurdity to expose the flaws in both extremes. The rigid logic of Victorian society and the utter chaos of a world without any rules at all.
So where does this leave us? What's the takeaway for our listeners who, like me, might be looking at Alice's adventures in Wonderland in a whole new light?
I think it's an invitation to think critically about the role of logic and reason in our own lives. Yes, it's important to question the rules and challenge assumptions, just as Alice does throughout her journey, but it's also important to recognize the value of logic as a tool for navigating the world, understanding complex issues, and building a just and equitable society.
It's like finding that balance between order and chaos, between blindly following the rules and rejecting them outright.
Exactly. And perhaps like Alice, we can find moments of wonder and delight in the unexpected, even as we strive to make sense of the world around us.
That's a perfect note to end on. So listeners, as you go about your day, remember, sometimes the most profound lessons can be found in the most unexpected places, even down a rabbit hole.